There is a specific, terrified sound that a high-voltage system makes right before it dies. A sort of electrical scream that sounds like a zipper being pulled up too fast, followed immediately by the heavy, finalized thud of a breaker tripping. And as I stood in the darkness of my workshop at 3 a.m., watching the woman next door in her silk pajamas flailing around in her driveway, because her $80,000 electric chariot just turned into a brick, I realized that revenge isn't a dish best served cold, it's a dish best served with 240 volts of righteous indignation. That woman, the one currently screaming at her charging port, is Elena Vance, a personification of entitlement wrapped in sustainable athleisure wear, who had been treating my main breaker panel like her personal all-you-can-eat buffet for 6 months, draining my bank account to fuel her performative eco-friendly lifestyle while lecturing me on my carbon footprint. She thought she was playing 4D chess, running subterranean cables beneath the frost line and gaslighting me about community standards. But she forgot that before I was a tired divorcee living in his childhood home, I was a master electrician with 25 years of experience in high-load industrial grids. And I don't just fix circuits, I design the kind of traps that catch rats, even the ones driving Teslas. My name is Jack Miller, 52 years of hard miles and calloused hands. And after my life imploded last year, leaving me with nothing but my tools and the deed to my parents' old place in Ironwood Heights, I retreated to the one place that made sense, the detached garage where the smell of stale oil and vintage leather creates a sanctuary away from a world that had moved on without me. I spend my nights there, from dusk until the late news, restoring classic Indian motorcycles, the rhythmic clink-clink of a socket wrench offering a meditation that therapy never could, just a man and his machines, trying to rebuild something beautiful from the rust. It was a good life, a quiet life, precisely the kind of blue-collar peace that lasted exactly 8 weeks before Elena rolled into the driveway next door in a white Model Y with a vanity plate that read GRNLFE. Looking like she'd just stepped out of a catalog for people who buy organic water, immediately setting the tone by knocking on my door to ask if I could mute the industrial noises, because her chakra alignment sessions required absolute silence. I tried to be neighborly, I really did, nodding along as she explained that my impact wrench was aggressively disruptive to her creative process, swallowing my pride, because that's what you do in a neighborhood like Ironwood Heights, where the working class is slowly being priced out by the tech wave spilling over from Boulder. But then the bill came, a piece of paper that usually demanded a modest $180 turning into a $340 accusation, and at first, I blamed myself, thinking maybe the compressor was leaking or the vintage welder was drawing too much juice. So I checked everything, calibrated every meter, and found nothing but perfect efficiency. It wasn't until a gray Tuesday in November that I saw it, a thick, orange umbilical cord snaking out from behind my rhododendrons, disappearing under the fence line, and plugging directly into the side of Elena's garage. She was out there, walking a labradoodle that probably had better health insurance than I did, wearing those oversized sunglasses that act as a shield against acknowledging lesser humans, and when I pointed at the cord, expecting an apology, maybe a flustered, "Oh my God," I didn't realize. She just looked at me with this chilling, dead-eyed vacancy, and said it was for her botanical heating system, and that I shouldn't be so petty over pennies. 50 cents, she called it, reducing the theft of my livelihood to pocket change. And when I pulled the plug, severing her connection, the mask of the friendly neighbor slipped, revealing a sneer that could curdle milk, followed swiftly by a lecture on how we need to share resources for the greater good, which is rich coming from someone stealing power from a guy rebuilding engines to pay alimony. The war didn't start with a bang. It started with paperwork, specifically a citation from the Homeowners Association, led by Susan Clark, a woman who means well but wilts under pressure, claiming I was violating noise ordinances that didn't exist, a clear retaliation for cutting off Elena's juice. I thought that was it, just a petty skirmish. But when the next month's bill hit $520, a number that made my stomach drop, because that's grocery money, that's keep the heat on money, I knew she hadn't stopped. She had just gone underground. I borrowed a thermal imaging camera from my buddy Tony, the wrench DeLuca, and there it was, a glowing red artery pulsing beneath the soil, a heat signature cutting straight from my meter pan, bypassing my main breaker, and feeding directly into her property, a professional-grade tap, that she must have hired some unlicensed cowboy to install while I was at work. I confronted her the next morning as she was loading yoga mats into the trunk, showing her the thermal photos, expecting shame, expecting fear, but instead, she leaned against the car, tapped her chin with a manicured nail, and suggested that maybe my wiring was just old and confused, gaslighting me with such professional ease that I almost respected the audacity. She then pivoted, smooth as silk, warning me that she'd heard unsafe humming from my shop and was worried about fire safety, a veiled threat that she would call the city if I kept digging. And that's when I realized this wasn't just theft. This was domination. This was a person who viewed rules as suggestions for other people. But the real gut punch, the moment that took this from a dispute to a crusade, happened when I saw Mrs. Higgins on her porch, wrapped in 3 blankets despite it being a mild afternoon. Mrs. Higgins is 74, a widow of a Vietnam vet, a woman who brings me cookies every Christmas, and she was crying, silently weeping over a utility bill that had spiked to $400, forcing her to choose between her heart medication and her heating. I looked at her bill, then I looked at the thermal camera again, and I saw the web, a second line running from Mrs. Higgins' box, feeding into Elena's basement, and suddenly the constant drone of cooling fans I'd heard from next door made sense. It wasn't just a Tesla, it was a server farm, a massive cryptocurrency mining operation powered by the fixed incomes of the elderly and the sweat of the working class. Elena wasn't just a bad neighbor, she was a predator in Lululemon, bleeding us dry to mint digital coins. And as I held Mrs. Higgins' trembling hand, I decided that I wasn't going to just stop her, I was going to dismantle her life with the precision of a surgeon, wire by wire, volt by volt. The escalation was subtle at first, a tightening of the noose that Elena didn't even feel because she was too busy counting her crypto profits and planning her takeover of the Ironwood Heights social hierarchy. She managed to charm her way onto the HOA board, launching a campaign of neighborhood purity that was nothing more than a weaponized initiative to drive me out, passing new bylaws that restricted unsightly mechanical labor to the hours of noon to 2 p.m., effectively trying to kill my restoration business. To add muscle to her psychological warfare, she recruited her boyfriend, a guy named Chad, who looked like he was manufactured in a lab that specialized in protein powder and unearned confidence, driving a lifted truck that he started parking specifically across the lip of my driveway, blocking me and while claiming he was calming traffic flow. I didn't fight back immediately, I didn't scream, I went silent, retreating into the workshop to build my defense, documenting every kilowatt, every interaction, every smirk Chad threw my way, knowing that data is the only currency the law respects. The turning point, the moment the sheer scale of her operation became undeniably clear, was during her summer solstice block party, an event where she strung thousands of LED lights across the cul-de-sac, serving organic wine and preaching about energy independence. I slipped away from the speech, walking the perimeter with my voltage meter, and noticed that the lights on Mrs. Higgins' house and the empty rental property across the street were dimming in perfect unison with the bass drop of Elena's party music, a telltale sign of load sharing. She had created a microgrid, a parasitic web connecting 4 separate houses to her garage, balancing the load so no single breaker would trip, a level of technical sophistication that was honestly impressive if it wasn't so morally bankrupt. I spent nights buried in legal statutes, discovering that in Colorado, meter tampering is a felony, but exploiting an at-risk adult like Mrs. Higgins? That's an enhancement that brings the feds into play, turning a property dispute into an elder abuse case with mandatory minimums. But Elena was getting sloppy, drunk on her own power, and when she realized I was still investigating, she went for the throat, spreading rumors that I was a peeping Tom, a lonely, unstable man obsessed with her, turning the neighborhood whispers against me until people I'd known for decades started crossing the street to avoid me. It was isolating, suffocating, but then came the miracle, the one piece of information that changed the entire battlefield. I received a call from an old contact at the city planning office, a guy who owed me a favor, and he dropped a bomb that made my knees weak. Elena didn't own the house. The property had been foreclosed on 14 months ago, the bank held the title, and the utilities had been officially severed for non-payment since last March. She was a squatter, a high-end, delusional squatter living in a dead house. keeping the lights on solely by stealing from us, maintaining this elaborate charade of wealth and status while living in a building she had no legal right to enter. This wasn't just theft anymore. It was grand larceny, trespassing, and fraud on a scale that was almost Shakespearean in its tragedy. Armed with this, I prepared the trap, a modified subpanel in my workshop that looked like a standard breaker box, but was actually a high-speed switching system designed to detect unauthorized load. The plan was simple. Let her hook up, let her think she was winning, and then, when the load peaked, the system would dump a controlled surge back down the line. Not enough to start a fire, but enough to turn delicate electronics, like, say, a GPU mining rig or a Tesla charging inverter, into expensive paperweights. She must have sensed the danger because 2 nights before I was set to spring the trap, I caught her on my new infrared cameras, dressed in black like a cat burglar, creeping into my backyard with a pair of bolt cutters, trying to physically sabotage my connection to the grid to hide her tap. It was pathetic and terrifying, watching this woman who hosted charity galas fumbling in the dirt, cursing as she realized my conduit was steel-reinforced, and the next day, she showed up at my door, pale and jittery, offering me an envelope with $500 cash. A gesture of goodwill, she called it, her eyes darting around, the panic finally setting in, trying to buy my silence for the price of a used tire, not realizing that I already had the footage, the logs, and the foreclosure documents scanned and ready. She thought money could fix it. She thought intimidation could fix it, but she didn't know that I had already visited Station 42, the local firehouse, because I had noticed a strange cable running from her back fence toward their utility pole. When I told the chief that she was tapping into the emergency response grid, stealing power meant for life-saving equipment, his face went a shade of purple I'd never seen before, and that's when the FBI got the call, because messing with critical infrastructure is domestic terrorism. The trap was set, the players were in motion, and Elena Vance was about to find out what happens when you cross a man who knows exactly how to ground a live wire. The end didn't come with a whisper. It came with an audience, orchestrated at the monthly community meeting held in the fluorescent-lit basement of the Ironwood Heights Community Center, a room packed with 80 neighbors who smelled blood in the water. Elena walked in late, flanked by a lawyer who cost more than my truck, and Chad, who was looking significantly less tough now that subpoenas were flying, wearing a white power suit that screamed innocence, acting as if she were the victim of a witch hunt. Susan Clark, the HOA president, tried to maintain order, but the tension was thick, a physical weight in the room, until Elena took the mic, putting on a tearful performance about how I was harassing her, how I was a danger to single women, a performance so convincing that for a second, even I wondered if I was the villain. But then I stood up, plugged my laptop into the projector, and simply said, "Let's look at the data." The first slide wasn't the theft. It was the foreclosure notice, the bank documents proving she had been trespassing for over a year, and the collective gasp from the room sucked the air out of the building. Elena's face went from smug to ashen in a heartbeat, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock, stammering that it was a mistake, a banking error, but I didn't let up. I clicked to the next slide, the thermal video of her stealing from Mrs. Higgins, followed by a graph showing the thousands of dollars she had siphoned from a fixed-income widow. Mrs. Higgins stood up then, small but mighty, pointing a shaking finger at Elena and saying, "I ate cold soup for 3 months because of you." A sentence that turned the room from confused to a lynch mob. I showed the video of her trying to cut my lines, the evidence of the crypto farm, and finally, the coup de grace, the letter from the fire chief confirming she was stealing from Station 42. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, until the doors at the back of the room opened and Detective Reynolds walked in, followed by 2 federal agents in windbreakers. They didn't even let her finish her protest. They cuffed her right there in front of the projector screen, the blue light of the evidence casting long shadows over her ruined facade, while Chad sat there, head in hands, realizing his accessory charges were about to ruin his life. Elena screamed as they dragged her out, screeching about how I ruined her, how she was a creator, a visionary, but nobody was listening anymore. The spell was broken. She pleaded guilty 3 months later to federal charges of utility theft, wire fraud, and interference with critical infrastructure, receiving 18 months in federal prison and a restitution order of $67,000 that she will be paying off for the rest of her life. The bank seized the house immediately, scrubbing it of the crypto rigs, and in a twist of poetic justice that you couldn't write better, it was sold at auction to a young couple, the husband being a rookie firefighter at the very station she stole from. Mrs. Higgins got her money back, and then some, thanks to a neighborhood fund we started, and I spent the next spring rewiring her house for free, making sure she'd never have to worry about a bill again. The neighborhood healed, the tension evaporated, and the silence returned. The good kind of silence, the kind where you can hear the birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower, not the drone of a mining rig. But as I sit here now, polishing the chrome on a 1948 Indian Chief, watching the sun go down over the mountains, I still think about the ease with which she did it, how she weaponized our politeness against us, how she used the guise of community to prey on the weak. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? In a world where appearance is everything, where we trust the shiny car and the right buzzwords, how many Alinas are out there right now, plugged into someone else's life, draining them dry while smiling for the camera? We got justice this time, sure, but justice is rare, and it requires someone willing to get down in the dirt and cut the wire. Would you have the guts to do it? Or would you just pay the bill and look away?